right, let's start with some updates from Pakistan, where the question, of course, that is being asked is the mainstreaming of terrorism pretty much a project in completion? Now, a fresh tweet by the son of late Benazir Bhutto accusing the country's establishment of aiding terror groups seems to suggest pretty much the same. Now, after ousted Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's confession about Pakistani army aiding the terrorists to attack India, it is now the turn of Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, who has now charged the Pakistani deep state of encouraging terror groups in the upcoming general elections. Now, without taking names, Bilawal Bhutto has accused the Pakistani army of helping the banned terror outfits in July 25th election, while at the same time creating hurdles for his party's election campaign. Now, Bilawal has tweeted, and I quote, "The banned organizations are being encouraged, facilitated and promoted to contest elections while we were stopped by the Punjab police barricades today in the Uch Sharif constituency. We'll continue to take our message to every part of the country, come what may." Bilawal was in fact indirectly referring to the Mumbai attacks mastermind Hafiz Saeed-backed Allahu Akbar Tehreek that has now fielded candidates for the Pakistani general elections. The terror outfit Allahu Akbar Tehreek was floated after the Pakistani Election Commission had refused to recognize Saeed's Milli Muslim League, which is a frontal terror outfit of the Jamaat-ud-Dawa. And also earlier in an interview in June, disgraced former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif had admitted of Pakistani government's collusion with terror groups to perpetrate the 26/11 Mumbai attacks in India. Now, Sharif had said, and I quote, "Militant organizations are active. Call them non-state actors. Question, of course, is should we allow them to cross the border and kill 150 people in Mumbai? Explain it to me why we cannot complete the trial." Though Sharif did not name the Mumbai attack mastermind Hafiz Saeed and Maulana Masood Azhar's terror organization, Jamaat-ud-Dawa or the Jaish-e-Mohammed, he clearly admitted that these banned outfits had in fact got a free run to operate in Pakistan. And earlier I had spoken about this very issue, the mainstreaming of terror elements and in fact the ceding of the grounds by the civil establishment in Pakistan, with guests from India and Pakistan listening. We're joined in by two guests. Firstly, we have Sushant Sareen, who is a strategic affairs analyst who's joining us from New Delhi. And also we're joined by Shahzab Jilani, who's a journalist joining us from Karachi. Now, Shahzab, let me begin with you on this, because this in many ways is a pivotal moment for Pakistan. In fact, what has happened in the case of Nawaz Sharif, where he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, has also been described as a bit of a soft coup. How much do you think this charge that terror groups and also extremist elements are now being mainstreamed into Pakistani politics is true?
I have just spent a week in Balochistan province, talking to 3 or 4 main political parties there, and the single biggest worry they all share is the fact that the army or the establishment is interfering in the political process.
Right.
They are creating new parties. They are pressurizing established parties. They have their favorites they're promoting. So this kind of pre-poll rigging has been going on for the last couple of months, and I think it's more than clear that this election will be tainted.
All right, this election will be tainted. Sushant, if I could bring you in on this, you know, it is no secret in the manner in which certain elements in Pakistan have in fact got encouragement in this particular election. Now, the military has in fact staged coups in the past, but this time round they're taking a slightly more sophisticated sort of an effort to try and get their people in power. How disturbing is this development in the context of India?
Well, I don't think it disturbs us any which way, because regardless of who wins these elections, I don't think their policy towards India is their own. That policy comes from the GHQ. So I frankly, it's just an academic interest who wins these elections. But having said that, I think the Pakistan army has tried these kind of fiddles in the past. Even in 1970, when the elections were being held, they played this kind of a fiddle. They tried to, stack the deck in a way that no one party would get the votes, but then Awami League pulled off a surprise. And those kind of surprises have been pulled off in subsequent elections as well. So while they're very good and very clever in these kind of manipulations which Shahzeb is talking about, the end result sometimes comes as a bit of a shocker for them. Whether that happens this time or not, we don't know. But I don't see how this kind of a thing really pays off the Pakistan army, because regardless of if their favorite child Imran Khan gets to form the government, even if he gets close to a majority, I think the inbuilt contradiction between the civil and military on who's going to call the shots will emerge sooner rather than later. So that conflict is inherent in the system, and I don't see how these kind of fiddles are going to be able to address that particular conflict and contradiction.
Absolutely, indeed. That's an interesting point that you've raised. Now, Shahzeb, if I can bring you in on this, because this is a point which Nawaz Sharif also raised, that perhaps there is a concerted attempt by the establishment, the military in Pakistan, that certain elements are now being encouraged. And this is something that actually does not bode well for the future of Pakistan at all, because now what we are looking at is these terror elements that earlier had been on the fringe could in fact be sitting in the Pakistani parliament.
There are two views on this. I spoke to the head of Jamiyat-e-Ulama Islam, Fazlur Rahman Group, one of their central leaders in Balochistan.
Right.
And I asked him about this particular point, that there are these extremist groups who are outside the fold of established religious parties. They're being ushered in for the first time for this mainstreaming project. And his view was, it can only be good, because once these people are brought into the mainstream, they are not on the fringes anymore. They then learn to behave. They watch their word. They have to then act, I suppose, more politically than militantly. Now, there's the other view in Pakistan, which believes that bringing these extremist groups who preach hatred towards our neighbors, who preach hatred within Pakistan against certain sectarian groups, can only be bad, because then they will pollute the parliamentary process, and no legislation will take place, no movement will take place on foreign policy, and the army will have its proxies in the parliament doing its bidding.
But Shahzeb, if I could just interrupt you on this, the first point that you made, getting these extremist elements into the mainstream politics of Pakistan may in fact make them mend their ways. But the fact of the matter is, their entire rhetoric is directed against India. They'll pay very little attention to the issues which actually matter to the people in Pakistan. How much water does this argument hold that getting these terror groups, these extremists, into the mainstream will actually make them change their ways?
Well, you only have to look at, for example, Afghanistan. The US has been trying to bring in Afghan Taliban for, 18 years now to a negotiating table. Obviously, there's a precondition that you lay down arms, you accept the constitution, and you commit to political process rather than war. It's a similar thinking where, yesterday's terrorists can be tomorrow's responsible politicians. We've seen this in Ireland, for example. So without being dogmatic about it, the argument for bringing these people into the mainstream can only be successful if they renounce violence, they renounce hatred, and they commit to a political process, which they really haven't. They are still standing by whatever they've been preaching, against the neighbors and against Muslims in Pakistan. So that is why you have to watch it with a lot of concern. That this is not good news for Pakistan. This is not good news for India. And these elections, if they are rigged, as it seems, it can only be bad for the country and for the region.
All right, let me get Sushant in on this. Sushant, do you agree with that argument at all, that getting some of these extremist elements into the mainstream is perhaps one way of trying to get them to mend their ways? Has it happened anywhere in the world?
Not really, because I don't think any two situations can be compared. Now, the assumption which Shahzeb is talking about, one has heard this, and presumably he spoke to Abdul Ghaffur Hedri, and other such people have been making these kind of claims. The problem with that is that if these groups had actually renounced violence, then, it would be one thing. But
Okay.
I don't think the Milli Muslim League parent organization, the Lashkar-e-Taiba oblique Jamaat-ud-Dawa, has given up on its kind of jihadist policies
Absolutely.
or its jihadist wing. That pretty much stays alive. We are seeing it active in Kashmir and other parts of the world. So there is that problem that you have not weaned them away from the terror industry in which they are so successful, but you've also ushered them into the political realm. The second point is with some of the more extreme parties like the Tehreek-e-Labbaik and others, if supposing, let us assume for a minute that they might not win any seats, but they get say about 500,000 votes, maybe 1 million votes, would they not be then justified that if currently the kind of extremist rhetoric which they make on the streets, if that is already getting them so much traction, perhaps they should ramp it up even more, because that's what is going to make them even more popular with their course constituency. So I think the assumption will ultimately be tested both in the elections and what happens after the elections and how these guys operate on their politics. And I am not so sanguine that the Pakistani state, which is the deep state rather, which is hand in glove with these guys, has any problem as far as they are concerned, because every time they step out of line, they go and carry out an encounter, bump off 5-7 of them, and most of the others fall in line. So maybe that's what the assumption is. So I think we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. I'm not as sanguine about the prospects of these guys reforming as some other people might be.
Absolutely, indeed. That's a tricky assumption, and it is effectively playing with fire, but that is something which perhaps Rawalpindi has been doing for the last several decades. Now, Shahzeb, the fact of the matter is, this admission by Nawaz Sharif and now again by Bilawal Bhutto that there are these certain extremist elements who are being ramped up. Now, this of course points towards a trend that this is perhaps the beginning, and what we could see is in future the civilian governments that we've seen, could increasingly be ceding space to these fundamentalist elements who could in fact come to dominate Pakistani politics. All of this, of course, is incumbent on what happens in the elections, but the trend appears to be that way. How do you make that?
No, I think you're right. Parties which have roots among the masses, parties which have been in the government at some point, these are mainstream parties who have never really campaigned on anti-India slogan to win votes. In 2013, Nawaz Sharif was saying he wants to improve relations with both their neighbors, and I think he eventually then paid a price for making an effort towards that end. People's Party has been accused of being pro-India and Indian agents and so on and so forth. So what we're seeing is sidelining and marginalization of these parties, army trying to bring in groups who are hardline, who are extremists, who are in some cases they promote violence and jihad, whatever that means. So this is, we are drifting towards more sort of hardline and more violent kind of scenario. And this is deeply worrying for Pakistanis because there's no level playing field. An ordinary Pakistani has never voted for these parties. An ordinary Pakistani wants sort of a more mainstream political parties, but they are not going to have their say as they would like in the elections.
Absolutely. That of course, is an extremely disturbing sort of a trajectory into which Pakistan appears to be falling into. And Sushant, if I can give you the last word on this, is there anything at all that India as a much bigger neighbor can perhaps potentially do? Is there any way that, this trend can be reversed in Pakistan?
I don't think so. I don't think we should even bother about it. Frankly, listen, how does it make a difference to us? Please tell me, the guys dressed in the khaki uniforms, what is there for me to choose between them or say a Hafiz Saeed or a Khadim Hussain Rizvi or any of the other fellows who are now making a beeline for the hustings? For me, there's very little to choose between them or any of the others. My experience over the last 70 years has been one of unremitting hostility, crazy brutality, all sorts of things which have happened. I wonder how much worse things will be. I think the people who really have to worry about it are people in Pakistan, about what will happen to their country. For me, the silver lining is that the kind of folk tongue many Pakistani leaders talk with India, I think that will end, and at least we'll know what,
Right.
we will be dealing, what kind of people we are dealing with. And we won't be beguiled by the kind of stuff which, maybe a Bilawal Bhutto or a Nawaz Sharif or somebody or the other says. Because at the end of the day, there is very little to choose between them and a general in khaki.
Right.
So between khaki and mufti, not much to choose. And if the confusion and the ambivalence in India on what we are dealing with ends, I think we will be better off for it.
All right, that's a somber note to end it there. We'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed to Sushant Sareen and also to Shahzaid for having joined us in this conversation. But this, of course, is an election that will be watched very closely because of the ramifications this, of course, will have on the much larger, not just in Pakistan, but also on the subcontinent.
Just weeks before elections, big political earthquake in Pakistan. It's jail term for the Sharifs. What will be its fallout on Pakistan? Is it an attempt to crush the party? Will Imran gain or the Islamists? Or will the Sharifs bounce back with sympathy votes? Big story on WION.